Most of us rail fans have a certain area or town that we try to go to at least once or twice a year. For me, one of my favorites is a stretch of the CSX Chattanooga Subdivision between Stevenson, Alabama and Waxahachie, Tennessee. Now, for those of you that have been on my channel since at least this time last year, you'll know that I took a trip up here during the first weekend in November for my birthday, and we'd be doing the same exact thing this year. Arriving in Stevenson just after 6 p.m. on Friday, November 3rd, 2023, we would set up and wait for whatever was coming. But for right now, everything would be quiet and it would stay that way for the next couple of hours. For those of you that are new to the channel and may not know much about Stevenson, it is also where Norfolk Southern's Memphis East End District, which is off to the right, comes into the Chattanooga Subdivision and runs under trackage rights for the 33 miles until Waxahachie, where it crosses back over onto its own rails, which is what makes the whole area between here and there a great place to rail fan. Just over an hour later, we would start to hear what sounded like a train coming out of Chattanooga over the radio, and finally, at 7:48 p.m., he would arrive in Stevenson, being symboled Z350 or NS 289, coming out of Croxton, New Jersey, and diverging off of the Chattanooga Sub here as it heads for Rossville, Tennessee. Next up on the CSX side would be southbound manifest M585, coming out of Radnor Yard in Nashville as it heads south for Waxahachie Yard in Chattanooga. About 30 minutes behind the M585 would be another southbound manifest coming out of Nashville, this one being M515, heading south for Rice Yard and Waycross. This would be one of the last M515s that I would see, as it now runs via Birmingham instead of the W&A and Chattanooga subs.
6.7 track, main 2, no defect. Repeat, no defect. Total axle 618. Detector out.
Just over an hour later, a southbound intermodal would show up on the NS side coming from Memphis, headed towards Chattanooga, symboled Z607, with some good foreign power at the head end. Another hour would pass before our next train would show up, this one coming off of the CSX side and being southbound loaded coal train C319. And for some reason, the dispatcher would not line him through here at Stevenson, as just a couple minutes before the recording, I went to go check the southbound signal and it was still red for him and I could already hear him coming in our direction. So he'd be starting off from a pretty slow start here. C319 would be the last train for us on night 1 as we'd head back to the hotel, but we'd be back out tomorrow for a full day of rail fanning.
C319 on that CSX 3387. South clear, midway, one track.
We would get an early start the next morning on Saturday, November 4th, 2023, as we would leave our hotel at around 8 a.m. and arrive in Stevenson just after 8:45, with already a medium clear lit up for our northbound and a horn off in the distance towards Chattanooga. And just a few minutes later, our northbound would crest the hill coming into downtown Stevenson, calling us M648, out of Rice Yard and Waycross, heading to Clearing Yard just outside of Chicago, Illinois. And this train was a big one, taking 6.5 minutes to go through at around 30 miles an hour. About an hour later, over on the NS side, here would come northbound intermodal 288 out of Rossville, Tennessee, headed for Croxton, New Jersey. Just seconds after the passing of 288, the southbound CSX signal would light up with a high green, and this train was not far out at all, as less than 10 minutes later it would sneak up on me and I'd only have about 20 seconds to set up. The train in question would be M203, Autoracks out of Osborne Yard in Louisville, Kentucky, bound for Baldwin, Florida. Just a couple minutes after M203 had passed, I would pick up some interesting radio chatter and then would pick up the 116.7 defect detector go off twice in the span of about 30 seconds. Then I would pick up what sounded like another train calling an approach medium at the Midway signal, which is just a couple miles south of Stevenson. When I went to go check the switch alignments, there was a diverging move off of track 2 and the switch was lined now for the NS. So I would set up for whatever it was that was coming. The train would turn out to be 283, out of Charlotte, North Carolina, bound from Memphis, Tennessee to the BNSF, where it will then head out west, presumably to California. And since this train was heading back to the BNSF, it would have all BNSF power on the head end.
CSX detector, milepost 116.7 track, main 2, no defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axle 446, detector out.
Everything would then go quiet until about 2 p.m. as we started to make our way towards Chattanooga, as we would hear of a run-through BNSF coal train coming from the Memphis side off of the NS. So we would set up just a couple miles outside of Stevenson at the County Road 70 crossing, as this loaded run-through coal train symboled Z344 would have quite the lash up on the head end, being two Heritage 2 AC 4400s with the leader having a great K3LA, along with a Canadian Pacific AC 4400 being one of the rear train DPUs. Once Z344 passed, we heard over the radio that he'd be stopping at South Bridgeport for a train coming from Chattanooga. What we did not know was how close that train was, and as we pulled into Bridgeport, there would be his locomotives going the other direction. So we would do a U-turn and make a beeline back over to the County Road 70 crossing to set up for him. The train would be Z720 or presumably NS 365, out of DeButt's Yard in Chattanooga, bound for Decatur, Alabama. And on this day, 365 would have quite the consist, with two NS motors sandwiching a newly repainted UP AC 6000, with the leader having a great P5.
CSX detector, milepost 116.7 track, main 2, no defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axle 438, detector out.
Now moving on into Bridgeport, we would set up on the south side of the Sequatchie Valley Railroad's Bridgeport Yard, waiting on an M580 that wasn't too far out. Now the odd thing about this M580 was that all of its locomotives were facing long hood forward. I don't know how and why this happened, and I've never seen it before on CSX, so it was a first for me, which was a pretty cool catch. And I know CSX is not a big fan of using locomotives long hood forward, especially on road trains, and I assumed they would want to spin the locomotives around as soon as possible, and sure enough they would, as later into the night a fellow railfan would tell me that they had spun the locomotives around at the Widows Creek Y, just a couple miles north of here. We would eventually head into Chattanooga, but would unfortunately not see a single bit of movement, so the next clip you'll see will be us back in Stevenson later into the evening. Arriving back in Stevenson at around 6:30 p.m., there would already be 2 trains in the picture, one of them being an empty unit coal train sitting on track 1 about a couple hundred feet to the south of us, and the other being southbound Manifest M585. And no more than 15 minutes after we would arrive here, 585 would round the corner into downtown. Once M585 crossed over onto track 2, the dispatcher could realign the switch back to track 1 and give our empty coal train a high green to head north for Nashville. I would eventually come to find out that this train was an E306 coming out of Plant Bowen off of the Cartersville Subdivision, headed north for Evansville, Indiana. I don't know what it is, but at about this time at night, every time that I've been to Stevenson, things start to get really busy. For example, 2 more trains were now in the picture, and one of them was already here on the other side of the station on the NS side waiting for this train to clear. With E306 now out of the way and heading north for Nashville, it was now NS's turn to hop onto the Chattanooga Subdivision to head towards Chattanooga. This train would be the counterpart of the 283 that we saw earlier in the day, 284, going from Memphis to Charlotte with more BNSF run through power. Now with 284 out of the way, the next train, symboled Z350, gets permission to head towards Memphis. About an hour later, another NS train would show up heading towards Memphis, this one being yet another intermodal, symboled Z364. However, he would only have an approach going through the turnout here, as there was a train going into the siding at the next block south of here, which hadn't fully gotten in yet. Give it another 45 minutes and we got 3 more trains in Stevenson. The first one coming south from Nashville being M515. The second one being that other NS that had met the intermodal at that siding just a couple of miles from here, now has pulled up to the station and stopped, and the third one being another CSX train sitting behind me on track 1 waiting to head north. This night's 515 would be a big one with 3 engines at the head end and 2 in the middle. was now the northbound's turn to head north for Nashville. The train would be E320, coming out of Cross, South Carolina, headed back to Evansville, Indiana. But this guy would also have an empty unit grain train on the bottom end, which may have originated somewhere near Cross and could also be destined for Evansville. With a medium clear indication lit up for him, it was finally NS 362's turn to hop onto the Chattanooga Sub. 362 is daily freight out of Sheffield, Alabama, bound for the Butts Yard in Chattanooga. After 362 passed, we were about to call it a night, but with some chatter over the radio and a clear signal for a southbound on the CSX, we would stick it out for one final train. The train would be southbound coal load C305, coming out of Evansville, Indiana, bound for Plant Bowen and Stylesboro off of the Cartersville Subdivision. Once C305 passed, we would head back to the hotel so we could get up early the next morning for our last day out here on the Chattanooga Subdivision.
CSX detector, milepost 116.7, track main 1, no defect. Repeat, no defect. Total axle 510, detector out.
We're now back out on our final day during the early morning hours of Sunday, November 5th, 2023, set up just past the control point of South Bridgeport on the pedestrian bridge that goes over Guntersville Lake. We'd be set up for NS 288 just like the one that we saw the morning prior, with more intermodal and tankers. The cool thing about this 288 is that the lash up is the same one that we saw on the first train of the trip. Arriving back in Stevenson, it wouldn't be too long before our first train would show up, being southbound M583 out of Radnor Yard in Nashville, bound for Hamlet, North Carolina.
Clear, Stevenson, M583, 053299. Oh, single main number 2.
CSX detector, milepost 116.7, track main 2, no defect. Repeat, no defect. Total axle 472, detector out.
About 30 minutes behind M583 would be another southbound coming out of Nashville, being yet another coal train, symboled C904, coming out of Evansville, Indiana, heading down to Andrews, South Carolina, doing every bit of track speed through here at downtown Stevenson.
and CSX 786, clear Midland, drop off.
We're now set up for one last train in Stevenson, being another NS-284 with a BNSF GEVO leading an NS AC-44C6M on this early afternoon. I like to call these trains the JB Hunt Special because almost all of their containers are just JB Hunt, and on this day that would be exactly the case. Every well car except for one at the end of the train would have all JB Hunt containers. As we started to make our way back home, one more train would light up my radio calling a clear signal at the control point of Whiteside. So we'd make a quick run over to the control point of James to catch him, as a northbound unknown NS manifest heads towards Stevenson. And this is how 2023's version of a weekend along the Chattanooga Subdivision would come to an end. And I thank y'all for coming along with me. But until next time, this is Georgia Rail Production saying so long from the control point of James along the CSX Chattanooga Subdivision.